Pervaz's business. They were already finishing it, and Asha said that they would deal with the rest tomorrow. Decker thanked her for her efforts, and Asha thanked him in return for his efforts. She was noticeably tired and intended to go to her room to rest after a hard day. After a moment's hesitation, Decker called out to her, as he had been feeling uneasy for quite some time now, but had never found the time to talk about it. Asha turned around and looked at him in surprise, because she thought they were done for the day. Decker paused again, looking at her with concern, and asked if she was okay. She lowered her head. It was a good and very difficult question that created a swarm of thoughts in her head. Asha thought that the situation with joint training would improve, that Pervaz's other problems were gradually being resolved, but the question of how she felt was not so simple. She honestly said that she wasn't sure how she felt, didn't know if it was bad or not, and apologized for it. Decker noted that such an answer implied that she was not okay. Asha smiled weakly, saying that if she thought about it, there was no reason for her to be in such a state. She thought of Carlyle and said that now she was being helped in the restoration of Pervaz by a man whom she would not have dared to look into the eyes before. Asha smiled brighter and said she would think about it. Patting Decker on the shoulder, she said that it was getting late and it was time to go to bed. Decker gently grabbed her hand and asked her not to close herself off, as this could all end badly. Asha pulled her hand back, looking at him a little irritated. She said that she didn't understand what he wanted from her, because she herself didn't know why she was in such a state. Decker noted that it looked more like Asha was pretending to be ignorant, and that in fact the reason was clear to her. He assumed that her current condition was related to Carlyle and no one else. Asha hung her head, saying that everything here was connected with Carlyle, and she didn't understand how to answer such a question. Decker calmly but firmly asked her to stop, and asked directly if Carlyle had hurt her pride. Asha was taken aback and confused by such a direct question. She did not expect Decker to ask it. Asha tried to avoid the question, but Decker tried to encourage her to open up about her feelings and talk about it, as it was important. He said loudly that she had the right to do this, and Asha only sighed heavily, because this whole story was too confusing. After a pause, Asha said that everything was getting better, that they were simply being helped in many ways, instead of bargaining, and that the people's lives had become better. More loudly, she said that a huge number of things had come true, that they could not even dream of a year ago, so everything that was happening was a happy event. But she said more quietly that there was of course one but. Decker calmly asked what that but was. She said sadly that she felt like she wanted to do all this on her own. Asha said that even without her, just with Carlyle, Pervaz would be able to recover. Decker put his arm around her shoulders, surprised that this was what was bothering her. He called her silly, because everything was not at all as she imagined it. He asked her if she knew how sad and restless the people of Pervaz had been since her return from Gyro, and she asked what he was talking about. He exclaimed indignantly that they lived by selling her, and this weighed on every inhabitant of Pervaz. Decker covered his face with his hand. He said that in a sense they cut the thread of her life for themselves, even though it was planned. Even though they were stupid, they understood it well. Asha was surprised to hear this, and Decker continued. He said that if it weren't for her, many would have died this winter, and this future changed only thanks to her. Decker cried. He was offended that Asha thought so all this time, and he considered it his duty to explain to her that the mistress of Pervaz, who was leading them into the future, was she, and not Carlyle Evaristo. Seeing Decker's sincerity and some desperation, these words reached Asha and touched her deeply. She put her hand on his shoulder. It was very important for her to hear these words. Asha sincerely thanked him, because what she heard dispelled her doubts, and she wanted to do even more for Pervaz. Decker was glad to hear this, but the pent-up emotions took over, and he began to cry even harder. She tried to calm him down, and thought that everything was so. She was the mistress of Pervaz, and it was she who should pay Carlyle the price for all his help. She nodded to herself. She had to do all this and protect Pervaz. A few months later, it was April. Asha and Carlyle were looking out the window. Asha noticed that the valley was strange, and Carlyle asked for binoculars to look too. After looking around, Carlyle agreed that the environment was different from before. Asha thought that during this time, the ardor of the barbarians would fade, and they would not undertake anything. But everything that was built there gave rise to strange thoughts. All this was so unusual for barbarians. Carlyle noticed that the things there were larger than a cart, but smaller than the buildings. Asha assumed it was a structure for burying bones. Carlyle asked if it was the Egram tribe or another tribe, but Asha said it was difficult to say since there were many barbarian tribes in the abandoned lands. Carlyle asked what the chances were that several tribes had united, but Asha only shook her head, explaining that only the Luo tribe could have done that, but they had been defeated. Asha noted that after the defeat of the Luo tribe, the Igram tribe was the next in numbers, but they had been defeated not so long ago and therefore would not be able to prepare an army in such a short time. Carlyle asked why she was so sure, and Asha replied that the abandoned lands were in even worse condition than the original Purvaz lands were. Asha remembered a conversation with her father, how she asked if the people of the Igram tribe could be accepted into Purvaz. Her father shook his head and said that it was only because of corrupted magic that they could live in the abandoned lands. Asha had never heard of this and asked what this magic was. Her father told her that it was a strange aura that emanated throughout the abandoned lands, and no one knew the true face of this aura. Asha asked what would happen if these lands became corrupted, and he told her that in that case, attacks and destruction would begin. He said that the former ruler Purvaz even tried to share goods with the barbarians, but they always preferred attack and destruction instead of negotiations. He explained that it was because of this that the former ruler Purvaz dedicated his country to the empire. Asha was surprised. She asked if all this happened because of the magic on the abandoned land, and Amir confirmed that this is exactly what happened. He also noted that perhaps due to lack of education or low intelligence, the barbarian tribe was unable to create improved buildings or things. Remembering all this, Asha now thought that she did not believe that barbarians could have created such structures. Asha and Carlyle turned sharply away from the window when they heard the barbarians attack. The servants shouted that it was a tribe of barbarians, and Asha and Carlyle frowned. It all looked very strange. The servant asked Asha to look in the other direction, and she saw stone throwers there. Asha saw that the barbarians were operating these stone throwers, and she could not understand how they managed to build all this in such a short time. Meanwhile, the barbarians did not waste time, and the stone thrower launched its first projectile directly into the tower of the Purvaz castle. Asha was shocked. She did not understand how barbarians were even capable of using stone throwers. She ran away to take action and somehow stop this disaster. Seeing warriors in another room, she asked them to report the current situation. The warrior said that the scale was larger than before, and Asha asked if it was possible to find out what tribe it was. They said it was the Igram tribe, but Asha couldn't believe how, after the damage they had done, they could attack again in such a short time, and with rock throwers at that. The warriors said that there were 2,000 of them in total. The second detachment had not yet been found. The number of cavalry troops had doubled, and many of the horses were not wild. Asha didn't like all this. The number of both regular and cavalry troops increased greatly. She took the sword and went to ask Carlyle for help, since there was no way they could cope alone. Asha came to Carlyle and asked him for help, promising that she would certainly repay him in the future. Carlyle didn't understand why she was telling him about payment, because if Purvaz's troops fell, then they would suffer too. So this was a fight that the knights were obliged to enter. Asha explained to him that if he had not arrived in Purvaz, they would have suffered irreparable damage, which is why she tried to stop the barbarians herself, but now there was a dangerous situation. Carlyle sighed and said seriously that even if she thought he was arrogant, then she, who was trying to protect Purvaz alone, was also terribly arrogant. He said this wearily and sincerely, and Asha was struck by these words, especially by the fact that in a sense he was right. But still, she was the mistress of Purvaz, and therefore believed that it would be right to repay him for his help. Carlyle looked at her with slight concern. He was not sure that she correctly understood the meaning of his words. A second later, Carlyle, as if reading her thoughts, said that he did not think that the master of Purvaz had changed in any way, and if she wanted to repay him for his favor so much, then it would be better to leave it for the future. Asha was incredibly happy to hear these words and smiled at him gratefully. Asha and Carlyle rode out onto the battlefield, ready to fight to defend Castle Purvaz. They saw that the barbarians were rushing towards them and that they were determined to kill. Carlyle noted that compared to last time they were prepared from all sides, but Asha did not understand why this was happening because there was nothing truly valuable to them in Purvaz. Carlyle thought for a moment, then said that if their leader was not in their custody, then there was only one option left. He said that someone outside wanted to enter Purvaz, and these words made Asha nervous. She asked who it could be. Carlyle sarcastically said that he didn't even know who could be adding fuel to the fire of the Igram tribe's aggression against Purvaz, using materials and money that would be impossible to get back. These words dawned on Asha. She realized that he was talking about the Empress, and now she clearly understood her words about how she would send Carlyle to Pervaz. And now even Pervaz had suffered. Seeing her tension, Carlyle asked if she was scared by everything that was happening. She chuckled, asking again if he himself thought that she was scared now. Without giving him a chance to answer, Asha herself replied that such a trifle was not capable of frightening her. He noticed that she didn't have the best expression on her face right now, and Asha said that it was because she was starting to get angry. She said she wasn't yet sure if everything would be okay during the joint battle between Pervaz's warriors and Carlyle's Knights Templar. Carlyle chuckled mockingly, noting that they had been fighting each other so far, so some respect should have been awakened in them. Addressing the troops, Carlyle said that, as they had been told during training, they should split into 3 groups, go on the attack, and stand on the defense. He said that he himself, together with the Marquise Pervaz, would play the role of leaders. Carlyle then ordered Lord Bailey to take charge of the left front separately and control it. He gave Lord Solon the right front and asked him to control it. He looked at Decker and said that his task would be to protect Pervaz Castle. Everyone exclaimed in agreement that they were ready to carry out orders. After this, Carlyle rode up to Asha and asked if she was ready to go into battle, and she firmly stated that she was ready. He asked cheerfully if she wanted to leave him another will, but she replied just as cheerfully that her will had not changed since the last time. He snorted mockingly, saying that everything was clear to him, and suggested that they go into battle already. The army moved forward, with Carlyle and Asha at the head, Carlyle taking the lead, asking Asha to cover him. Carlyle galloped forward and immediately dealt a fatal blow to one of the barbarians. Asha did not give in to him and also galloped forward, striking enemies to death. The barbarians were having fun! They shouted to the others that the enemy leader was here and called on everyone to rush here. However, Carlyle put a blade to the throat of one of them and asked where such worthless people were going. The barbarian clearly did not expect such a turn of events, and now he was extremely frightened. He looked at Carlyle and saw the aura of a bloody killer who was about to take his life. In a moment, his thought was realized. Carlyle cut off his head without a second's delay. He rushed on, leading some of the barbarians behind him so that they would become an easy target for Asha. Asha took advantage of this opportunity, caught up with them, and jumping closer, coldly asked if they saw her, and this question frightened them. Without giving them time to react, Asha began to deal deadly blows that killed the barbarians one by one. Carlyle watched the spectacle out of the corner of his eye and was extremely pleased with the sight that was unfolding before him, until Asha suddenly shouted to him that he was being attacked from the right. Carlyle, although he was looking at her, easily interrupted this attack, killing the enemy on the spot. Asha, meanwhile, was already rushing to the next target to deliver a fatal blow to it as well. Covering each other's backs, Asha and Carlyle successfully made a bloodbath out of their enemies. Carlyle turned for a second to look at the pile of corpses behind him, and smiled slightly at the sight, because the barbarians deserved it. They were back to back again, and Carlyle remarked that it was excellent, but Asha yelled at him to be quiet and look ahead. Carlyle thought it was truly wonderful to have someone he could trust to protect him, and out loud he simply said that it was all wonderful. Asha turned to him and shouted again for him to look forward. The barbarian took advantage of the fact that she was not looking and tried to deal her a crushing blow. This blow would have succeeded and killed her, but Carlyle managed to stop it, telling her afterwards that she, too, should not forget to look after herself. She smiled. She was pleased by such care and said that she was in his debt for this. Carlyle smiled warmly back at her and told her that he was actually in her debt. They continued to fight aggressively, like gods of war who left their opponents no chance. One of Carlyle's knights noted that they were acting so smoothly and became distracted, but was saved by Pervaz's warrior. The knight did not lose his head at the remark to watch his back and covered the warrior's back, recommending that he also watch his own back. The artist from Pervaz Castle watched everyone through binoculars and tried to understand how the battle was progressing. He saw everyone fighting and was amazed at the way Carlyle fought. It made him understand how different the man who would become emperor was from the others. He tried to see who was next to him and almost lost his speech when he saw Asha. He was in absolute shock, as he didn't expect the Marquise to fight too. The artist thought he was observing a large number of people, but this was the first time he had seen anything like this. He thought they were moving as one, and that was exactly what he wanted to draw. The artist immediately rushed to the canvas, as this was the perfect scene, not one where they just sat quietly. He realized what kind of portrait he had to paint, and he thought that this portrait could become his most outstanding work, because he had figured out how they expressed love, and they expressed it not in a serene fortress, but on a battlefield where blood was shed. Pervaz's army successfully killed the barbarians, cutting off even the heads of their leaders. Many had already fled, and said that they were not told about this. They were used. The barbarians promised to curse these people until their death. Asha heard this and tried to understand who they were talking about and who was using them. A second later, Asha told Carlyle that he was probably right, and that this fight was not started voluntarily by the Egrams. Carlyle was surprised that she thought so too. He wiped the blood from his face and said that most likely they did not expect to win, and were simply planning to constantly interfere by holding such fights. Asha said that in that case, we need to end this war without letting them get in our way again. Carlyle chuckled and said he liked this fiery side of Asha. Carlyle shouted to the troops to act in such a way that the barbarians would clearly understand who was defending the borders of the empire and would no longer dare to stick their noses in here. He ordered the Third Army to block the border so that the barbarians could not escape, and Pervaz became the grave of these brats. The remaining group of barbarians was surrounded on all sides by Pervaz's army, but Carlyle saw that they were not laying down their arms and would continue to fight, which was almost commendable. One of the barbarians tried to attack him, but Carlyle put up a defense in time. Asha dealt with the other barbarians nearby to prevent them from attacking Carlyle and the other people. She noted that it looked like they wanted to get rid of Carlyle at any cost. Carlyle chuckled and said that they were really working hard to achieve this. The barbarians continued to attack him, but it was useless, and he only killed them again and again. He exhaled a little tiredly and thought that this was the first time he had seen those who so strongly desired to take his life. He wondered why they were so stubbornly pushing forward, whether it was because there was no turning back or because there was another reason. One of the barbarians started doing something strange, as if calling on some kind of black magic, and it infused power into the barbarian standing next to him. His eyes turned red. He charged at Carlyle with renewed rage and a desire to kill him. Carlyle saw this change in the barbarian, and it surprised him greatly. This magic was very strange and gave the barbarian an advantage he did not have before. But Asha dealt with him in the blink of an eye, not allowing him to take another step towards Carlyle. Carlyle noticed that he was in her debt again, since she had saved his life again. He asked what the barbarian had just said that caused the other barbarian to change, but Asha said she had no idea. Asha said that she had not heard of the Egram tribe having any language of their own, but Carlyle thought that he had heard something like that before. He remembered how, several years ago, he was riding in a carriage and suddenly heard people whispering in a strange language. He looked out the window and saw several people in raincoats whispering and doing something. Carlyle said that there was someone muttering something under their breath, and he would like to know what exactly they were saying. Thinking back on it now, he thought it was very similar to the speech the mage had given a while ago, and while he was thinking about it, Asha had shouted at him about the approaching enemy. Asha rushed headlong and killed this enemy herself so that he could not reach Carlyle. She asked him with displeasure why he was so disorganized, and he said thoughtfully that their speech bothered him. She told him not to pay attention to it because they would all be destroyed anyway. Carlyle smiled and said that for some reason her words sounded very aggressive all this time. She noted that on the battlefield, a person cannot remain sane, and he said that Asha is the only person who directly tells him that he has gone crazy. Carlyle closed his eyes for a second and thought that she was basically right, and he had started thinking so strangely because he had killed so many people. He looked at Asha cautiously and believed what he had just thought even more strongly. After all, if this were not the case, he would never have considered Asha attractive in such a situation. They moved on, and soon Asha dealt another fatal blow, after which the enemy could only fall powerlessly. One dead barbarian was followed by another, and again he fell a useless corpse to the ground. Carlyle did not lag behind her and also killed several barbarians, leaving behind only their dead bodies. Out of breath and covered in the blood of her enemies, she looked at Carlyle. Like her, he was also tired and covered from head to toe in enemy blood. He looked at her. They stood and looked at each other, not saying a word, but that silence said much more to each of them. When the sun had already set, they finished this battle, killing every single barbarian that was near them. Carlyle turned to look at the army and saw that they were finishing off the remaining barbarians. He said that it looked like it was all over. Asha also looked at the army and nodded. This was indeed the end for the barbarians. Standing in the rays of the setting sun, Asha smiled, looking at Carlyle. They felt the same. So a second later, they both moved towards each other and kissed. It was a brief kiss. filled with emotion from everything that had happened, from the care they felt for each other, and it was soon broken off. The crowd rejoiced at this and shouted, "Long live Pervaz, and also Carlyle and Asha." Meanwhile, in the temple, the high priest Gabriel used dangerous black magic to help the barbarians. And now he felt the consequences of using this magic, which unpleasantly reverberated throughout his body. Gabriel was angry at these barbarians, at these talentless brats to whom he had given such help. It infuriated him that despite all their help, they couldn't even give that bastard Carlyle a scratch. Gabriel grimaced, noting the pain of colliding with this man Carlyle. It was very unpleasant and resembled the shock of encountering divine power, he chuckled, telling himself that it made him look like a minion of the devil. Gabriel remembered how, after entering the divine abode, he had made every effort to make the empire just, but even within the temple, there were invisible influential fences. These fences were status, family, and many other things that changed the priest's decisions. The most severe discrimination and neglect was due to financial status. Those who did not have power in their hands could not remain in the capital, and Gabriel remembered this very well. One day, this injustice happened to him too, when Carlyle came to visit their city. He was on horseback, well-dressed, and greeted the townspeople in an aristocratic manner. Everyone was shouting his name, and someone accidentally knocked over a little boy who was picked up by Gabriel, who asked the boy if he was okay. Carlyle noticed both Gabriel and the boy who was now in his arms. He immediately turned away from them, pretending as if he hadn't seen anything like that. Gabriel looked at him with disappointment, because Carlyle was not at all worried about the fallen child, and at the same time pretended to serve the people. Gabriel helped the child up and asked again if he was hurt anywhere. Already in the evening, Gabriel realized that the man was the crown prince and was horrified by his possible rise to power, because then the empire would again be ruled by arrogant people. Gabriel then wished that he had the power to stop this man, and he began to study various books to find something that would help him with this. One day, his attention was drawn to one particular book that stood out among the others on the shelf. She seemed to have a purple glow and was looking straight at Gabriel. He took it and was surprised to find no title at all on the book. When he opened it, he was stunned. There was forbidden magic in it, which the locals also called black. He turned around to see if he was being followed and could not understand how such a book could have ended up in a small town. He thought that maybe this was a test sent to him by God himself. He knew that using black magic was a bad decision, but he considered himself an insignificant child of God and saw it as the only means that could help him create a holy empire. He thought that he was the one who sacrificed himself for others. Thus power would be in his hands, and he would make this empire sinless. He was sure that God would understand and forgive him for this. Leaving behind the memories of the past, Gabriel told himself what kind of heresy he had uttered, because he was a servant of God, not a minion of the devil, and this was only a process that he had to go through in the name of God. He exhaled, trying to understand what went wrong, because he even cleansed the souls of the barbarians. They had magic bound to their bodies that allowed him to lend them strength, and he cast a spell on them that would cause them to try to kill or drain Carlyle's life force. He thought that most likely his life force would be sacrificed when the barbarian tribe took his life, and that would be enough for Gabriel. He thought that the abandoned lands, which were considered cursed, could give him more opportunities in his business. Meanwhile, it took the combined army of Pervaz about a month to deal with the aftermath of this battle, and when it was all done, Decker thanked Asha and Carlyle for the work they had done. Carlyle thanked him as well, since without proper supplies and replacement of warriors, they would never have defeated the Egram tribe. But Decker only said that he only did what he was ordered to do. Carlyle, turning to Asha, suggested that all of Pervaz's people seemed uncomfortable accepting praise. Asha said nothing, as the answer was obvious, and now she was thinking about something else. She thought that they had somehow silently agreed with Carlyle that they would not talk about the kiss that happened on the battlefield. They walked on together and talked about how they had won this battle. Carlyle said that therefore they should have a victory banquet. Asha asked him about this again, since she had never participated in this before. She honestly admitted that they had never done anything like this before, and this amazed Carlyle, because there had been many wars in Pervaz. She explained that they had not had food for a long time, and previously they simply had nothing to throw a banquet with. He nodded understandingly, saying that it had been like that before for a reason, but now they were in a completely different situation. Smiling, Carlyle said he wanted to spend his personal wealth for the sake of all who worked to the end. Without accepting any objections, he ordered a victory banquet to be prepared for the inhabitants of Pervaz. Soon the banquet was held, and everyone was happily celebrating. The knights had friendly squabbles with Pervaz's warriors about the past battle. Carlyle and Asha watched them from above with glasses of wine, and were pleased that the relations between the knights and the warriors of Pervaz had noticeably improved. Carlyle noted that men always grow by fighting each other. He thought that what had happened in different directions had been beneficial. They had been able to warn the Empress, and she was now clearly gnashing her teeth in anger, and they had also gotten rid of the barbarian tribe, and the knights and warriors of Pervaz had begun to get along. Putting those thoughts aside, Carlyle looked at Asha standing next to him. Looking at her lips, he thought that his relationship with the Marquise Pervaz had also advanced. He turned away just as quickly, because even though it was good news, the memory of the kiss made him a little uncomfortable. Looking away, he wondered why they had done that back then, and okay, he did, but he wondered what Asha Pervaz was thinking to do that. Carlyle blushed as the thought occurred to him that perhaps she was starting to like him after all. Asha suddenly called him, thereby tearing him away from all extraneous thoughts. He looked at her and asked what had happened that made her decide to call him. Asha asked him what he wanted as payment, and promised that she embarrassed Asha beyond belief, and Nina was already rushing away to bring these clothes and not waste a minute of time. Soon Asha was dressed in this very embarrassing, in her opinion, nightgown. Nina threw a robe over her and asked if Asha liked it this way and if she should add some makeup. Asha smiled, saying that there was no need, since there was no need for makeup at night. She let Nina go and asked her to pretend that she knew nothing about what happened today. Nina bowed obediently, saying that she would remember and fulfill her request, and left Asha. Asha looked at herself, at how she looked now. It was strange to her because she almost never looked like this. She touched her hair and thought that if anyone who knew her saw her like this now, they would think she was going to commit suicide. Asha stood up and confidently tied the belt of her robe, reminding herself that she was the one demanding payment from a man who did not need this payment, and she could not make him wait any longer. She pulled on a less conspicuous hooded cloak to avoid drawing attention as she walked toward Carlisle. Carlisle sat sadly and drank, waiting for Asha, and wondered what he could do to make Asha stop neglecting her body. When he heard a soft knock on the door, he realized it was Asha and allowed her to come in. He felt this light aroma and felt irritation. She seemed to be seriously going to spend the night with him, and this was outrageous. He was not going to accept such payment. He turned around to say what she was doing there, that she came so late, and then was going to say that he did not need all this. But seeing her, he froze. As she removed her hood, Asha apologized, saying that she had been in a hurry as best she could. Asha looked unusual and very beautiful, so Carlisle didn't even know what to say to this. Taking off her coat, she explained that she had no such experience and that she did not know a lot. Therefore, she will be grateful if Carlisle, full of experience, will lead her. Carlisle had thought that he had planned to tease her a little and then let her go. But seeing her like this now, he really didn't want to let her go. He put his hand forward, and Asha asked worriedly if he was okay. Carlisle awkwardly replied that he was perfectly fine and that he was just a little drunk. Carlisle began to say that it was already late and that she had better go, but Asha did not let him finish, understanding it differently, and said that she would be ready in a moment. She began to quickly pull off her robe, revealing her nightgown to Carlisle. Carlisle had not expected to see Asha like this at all, and for a moment he didn't even know what to say. After a couple of seconds, he could only squeeze out a light sigh, looking at her. She stood there, awkwardly holding the hem of her nightgown, and he walked up to her. Carlisle put his arm around her and stroked her hair gently, looking at her embarrassed face. He ran his hand through her hair to the very tips, then abruptly removed his hand. He turned away from her, saying that it was all quite funny, what was happening now. Carlisle tried to make his voice contemptuous, and asked Asha if she really thought that seeing her like that could turn her on. He expected that after such offensive words she would leave, but she only grabbed his hand and asked what she should do in that case. Carlisle did not expect this. She tenderly kissed his hand, showing with her whole appearance that she was ready to do anything. This gesture confused him greatly, and he cried out, asking what she was doing. She continued to kiss his hand with that look of complete submission and chastity. Carlisle didn't know what to say or how to react to this. He was very confused by her behavior. Asha was also embarrassed. She asked for forgiveness, and again reminded that it was all because she did not know what to do. She had no idea how to behave and hoped that Carlisle would teach her the right way to behave. She looked at him anxiously, worried that he didn't like absolutely everything she did. She remembered the maid's questions about the pain and whether there was blood on the sheet. Now she thought that the words about blood bothered her a lot, and apparently she would get injured. She was used to getting injured in battle, so she should be able to handle this too. Carlisle felt very awkward about everything that was happening and called her name wearily. And then another brilliant idea or memory struck her, which Carlisle knew would bring no good. He asked her to finish it for today, as she had already done enough. But Asha didn't hear him. She was completely immersed in her own thoughts. She walked towards the bed, and Carlisle began to worry about her, as at first he did not understand where she was going. Asha sat down on the bed and asked him if she needed to lie down there. Carlisle felt even more embarrassed and asked her if she was doing all this on purpose to make him uncomfortable. Asha was horrified because she was trying to please him, but it turned out that she was doing everything wrong. He explained to her that today she was not behaving as usual, and he himself was thinking about how he had tried to send her away so many times, but she still continued to do all this. Asha was embarrassed and said that she understood that such clothes did not suit her. Carlisle spoke embarrassedly and loudly that it was not that, and he meant her behavior. Asha didn't understand what was wrong with her behavior, because it seemed to her that Carlisle disliked her, and she was only trying to please him. Carlisle didn't understand why she thought that, and said that he didn't dislike her, and she took his hand. She pushed him down on the bed, saying that she came here with such determination. And she doesn't understand why Carlisle continues to reject her if he doesn't feel hostility towards her. He just lay underneath her, confused and not knowing what to say to that. Asha was also embarrassed, but she looked at him with great determination in her eyes. Having made her final choice, she quickly kissed him right on the lips. Carlisle began to give in, and without resisting, began to surrender to this moment. When they broke the kiss, he gently ran his finger over her lips. He stood up, pulled her closer to him, and now initiated the kiss. Breaking the kiss, he gently stroked her face again and looked at her softly. Both of them had tender feelings towards each other at that moment. Soon, Carlyle was kissing her breasts, sometimes gently, sometimes roughly, and Asha was moaning softly from these kisses. He gently placed his hands on her waist and ran his hands softly along her. Asha placed her hands on his shoulders, and he noticed how much she was shaking. Looking at the embarrassed Asha, he asked her if she was nervous at that moment. She turned away, trying to hide her embarrassment, and said that since it was her first time, she was a little nervous. Carlyle stroked her hair and told her not to worry. It wouldn't hurt that much. Asha said she would be grateful to Carlyle for guiding the process, and he reluctantly admitted that this would be his first time too. She looked at him blankly, because it couldn't really be Carlyle's first time. Carlyle explained that this was his first time with her, and she said that if he had any wishes, he should say so, and she would try to fulfill them. He stroked her hair and asked if she knew what he might wish for. Asha replied that she did not know, but would do her best to make it happen. She said she would do it because it was the only way she could repay Carlyle. This cooled his ardor, because this was not at all what he wanted, and he pushed Asha away from himself. He said that if she wanted to dedicate her body to him only as payment for winning the battle, then they would stop now. But if she sincerely desired him, then they would continue. He asked her to answer his question honestly and sincerely, because now everything depended on this answer. Asha was very embarrassed. To be honest, she was no longer sure whether she came here just to pay him back. She looked at his handsome body and face, and wasn't sure if she was genuinely desiring him while doing so. Carlyle sighed heavily and sadly. She had not yet answered, but he already assumed that she did not want him sincerely. Asha, embarrassed and hesitant, grabbed his hand, squeezing it just a little so that he wouldn't leave. He looked at her in surprise. He didn't think she would do that and try to hold him back. Trying to overcome her embarrassment, she honestly admitted that she wasn't sure about all of this. Even more embarrassed, she asked Carlyle to hug her quickly. Carlyle looked at her, fascinated, realizing that she was telling him this quite sincerely. He pushed her onto the bed, leaning his whole body on her, and kissed her passionately. When morning came, they slept in the same bed after a wild night. Asha, waking up sluggishly, thought that it was already morning and it was time for her to start doing things. She decided that she had to leave here quickly before the servants woke up. Having dressed and put on a hooded cloak, she left Carlyle's chambers. She returned to her bedroom, confused and haunted by memories of the previous night. Asha remembered how Carlyle had asked her, tenderly and caringly, if she was in pain, how he gently asked her to relax when they made love. Asha became increasingly embarrassed, remembering his initial words about how if she truly desired him, he would not stop. Asha shook her head, completely not understanding herself and not understanding why she hadn't stopped then. She slapped herself loudly on the cheeks and ordered herself to pull herself together and not be a wimp. Asha nodded, convincing herself that these feelings were temporary because it was her first time, and that he was probably even more affectionate with other girls. She felt sad, thinking that she didn't want him sincerely, because they were simply connected by a fictitious marriage, and she was not even the crown prince's real wife. She simply dedicated her body to him as payment for the battle. Carlyle woke up, reached out and found Asha not there. He stood up abruptly and called her name, but was met with silence, indicating that Asha had already left. Carlyle thought it was his fault that he woke up so late. Maybe she even waited for him and then left. He thought he should have offered her lunch. As he got dressed, he also suggested that perhaps she was even angry with him. Carlyle stroked his lips, which he had kissed Asha with yesterday, and wondered if after a night together, partners really felt some kind of closeness towards each other. He was embarrassed, thinking that it was just one night spent together, but contrary to expectations, his soul was very happy. Carlyle rang the bell for the servants and asked them to tell his wife that he invited her to dine with him. He smiled happily as he remembered that night and wondered if Asha would allow him to kiss her on the cheek when they met. However, Asha came cold and dryly thanked him for the invitation to dinner. Everything was as usual. Carlyle was puzzled by her behavior because it was as if there had been no night between them. He awkwardly said that this was normal in their relationship and asked her to sit down. She sat down, still cold and distant, and said that she would be happy to have lunch with him. Carlyle felt more and more awkward. He didn't understand what went wrong and why Asha was acting like this. He began to go over different options in his head, and he distanced himself from what was happening. Asha watched him silently, noting that something was seriously bothering him. After a pause, she asked him if something had happened to cause him such concern. He asked her haughtily if his face was telling her something like that. Asha nodded at this and said that he had also barely touched his food. Carlyle asked if she really had no idea why. She was puzzled and assumed that something had happened at yesterday's banquet. Carlyle let out an exasperated breath and said that yes, there was one girl who offered to spend the night with him. Asha began to eat and calmly noted that, apparently, because of her, he had missed the chance in that case, while Carlyle irritably thought that he did not understand whether she was really stupid or really did not understand. He felt uneasy. He didn't understand how she could behave as if nothing had happened after last night. Carlyle decided to try a little provocation by saying that he was sorry that Cecilia and Dorothea were not present at the banquet and that it would be nice to invite them to dinner. Asha only said that everything suited her. He asked her again if she really didn't care at all, and she said that she really did. Asha asked if she should come down to dinner today, and Carlyle said that it depended on her wishes. She did not quite understand what this meant and asked again. But Carlyle was irritated by her behavior and told her to deal with it herself. After this, he went out, leaving her to dine all alone. Asha sighed. She didn't understand what was best to do, and Carlyle's reaction also raised questions. That evening, dinner was held. Asha sat opposite Cecilia and Dorothea. Carlyle was next to them in the center. Both girls warmly congratulated him on his victory and were glad that he returned in good health. Carlyle thanked them and looked at Asha, who was completely impenetrable. His idea that these two ladies could somehow excite her failed miserably. She didn't care. He thought that Asha now had such a face, as if she was about to go into battle with a tribe of barbarians right now. Dorothea noticed that the Marquise Pervaz was striking in her activity, and Cecilia noted that it was not easy to wield a sword with a woman's body, and asked if she was afraid. Asha calmly replied that she had only done what was necessary to protect her land. She decided that she would rather die on the front lines with a sword than die inactive. Cecilia was slightly confused by this answer. She noticed that Ash was probably calmer this time, since Carlyle was leading the fight. She suggested that if Carlyle had helped with the Lure tribe then, the war would not have dragged on for so long. Carlyle thought that what Cecilia was saying to the man who had defeated the barbarian tribe sounded very wrong. He assumed that she was saying that because she had not seen Asha fight. But Asha only agreed with this, saying that it would be wonderful if Carlyle was on Pervaz's side in the very first battle. Cecilia didn't know what else to latch onto, so she simply asked Carlyle to tell her a little more about the battle whose victory they had so brightly celebrated. Asha was silent, completely focused on her own thoughts. Carlyle calmly stated that as everyone knew, the barbarian tribe attacked Pervaz due to provocations from the Empress. He said that he was uncomfortable talking about such things in the presence of the Marquise Pervaz, but deep down he wanted such a battle to be realized. Dorothea asked him to clarify what exactly he meant. Carlyle explained that he never once thought that they could lose. He continued by saying that he had a trustworthy person next to him, which surprised Asha. He told Asha that he wanted to convey his official gratitude to her because he had never harmonized so well with anyone in battle. Carlyle said that this fight was truly memorable, and Asha smiled shyly and said that she was very grateful. Cecilia, watching their cooing, only grew more gloomy. As the dinner drew to a close and everyone said goodbye, Dorothea thanked Carlyle for the dinner, and Cecilia expressed the hope that they would dine together again at the next opportunity. Carlyle asked if Asha was leaving already, noticing that she was heading towards the exit, and she confirmed this. Asha said she needed to get some fresh air outside the room. She felt ridiculous. She tried her best to act natural and casual, but even she began to feel stupid and comical. It seemed to her that Carlyle understood everything. She didn't understand why she kept focusing her attention on him, and the same thing happened at dinner when he turned to Cecilia. Something similar happened when he praised Dorothea at dinner. She then drank silently, noticed all this, and could not understand why she was noticing all this. Now she sat here and didn't understand why she cared so much that Carlyle had spoken so highly of them at dinner. She thought that she was not like them, starting from her birth and the place of her birth. Remembering Cecilia, she thought that she was born into a powerful family and knew how to conduct herself in society. Dorothea was also born into a powerful family and has the necessary knowledge and experience, so they easily conduct social discussions with the prince and discuss current affairs. Asha looked at her own hands and thought that she herself did not know or can do any of this. She looked at her hands, calloused from the sword, and now she understood why people were so shocked by their marriage. She was completely unsuitable for the role of empress. Asha tried to understand herself better, and for some reason her soul was now extremely heavy. She felt very sad and tormented, and she just wanted her head to be free of these thoughts. But my head only brought up new memories of Carlyle, and he said that he had never harmonized so well with anyone on the battlefield, and that the fight was truly memorable. Here he is, gently stroking her hair and saying that he will not stop if she sincerely desires him. Asha realized that it was from then on that she began to go crazy. These were futile and stupid thoughts, and she took out the blade, pointing it at her chest. Decker saw this and exclaimed that Asha had gone crazy, wishing that she would immediately stop what she had planned. She was surprised by his appearance, looked at him and lowered her weapon. Asha hid the weapon behind her back and asked how long he had been there. Decker only said that she hadn't noticed his arrival at all. She looked away and said she was sorry. She had just had too much to drink. Decker asked if she was sorry she hadn't noticed he had arrived. He grabbed her hand, raising the dagger up, and asked if she didn't feel guilty at all about this. Asha was embarrassed and looked down, and he angrily asked what she was going to do about it. Asha pulled away from him and said that it was all completely unimportant. Decker was outraged that something like that could be unimportant. He said that Asha seemed to have completely lost her mind, and Asha agreed that she had gone a little crazy. She sighed and said that she wanted to use this thing to sort out the cockroaches in her head, but Decker didn't understand how she could say something so disgusting. Asha screamed that it was because she couldn't get rid of the thoughts that were tormenting her. She dropped the dagger and fell to her knees. All of this was hitting her very hard and driving her crazy. Decker looked at her with sympathy. He asked her not to suffer alone and to tell him what was bothering her. He sat down next to her and reminded her that he was always on her side and ready to help. Asha was grateful to him and said that she remembered this, but in this matter, he could not help her in any way. Asha said that she just needed to pull herself together and that she just needed a little time. He called her name and put his hand on her shoulder to support her. He hugged Asha tightly and asked her to tell him everything if things got really tough and not to do anything as stupid as she had tried to do recently. Asha was pleased by his attention. She smiled and promised that she would not do that again. Asha thanked him, and Carlyle watched them from behind the tree trunk the whole time. But he caught only part of the conversation, and now he was angry with Asha. It seemed to him that he wanted to console her in vain, because she had Decker, and it was clearly a joke that there was nothing between them. He thought that even if not now, then in the past they had been in a romantic relationship. He chuckled and thought that perhaps he was the reason for the split in their relationship, and then the behavior of the Marquise Pervaz would be more understandable to him. Carlyle thought that she had to sleep with another man, leaving the one she loved, so she could think of nothing better to do than pretend that nothing happened. Cecilia was in her room at the time, reading a book, and her faithful maid was by her side. The maid happily asked how today's meal had gone, and Cecilia replied that it had gone well. She said that Carlyle had praised her skills, and the maid was genuinely happy to hear the news. Angie said reverently that this was to be expected, since Cecilia was good at eloquence, ethics, and even politics and history. She paused in surprise when she realized that her mistress was not listening to her at all and was simply reading a book. Angie asked solicitously that even today, Cecilia probably looked better than the Marquise Pervaz. Cecilia was silent for a moment, and then said that she had probably said too much at dinner that night and spoiled the mood. But she did not answer the maid's question about who exactly she was talking about. Cecilia thought she was going crazy. She thought that even if she devoted all her time to Carlyle, it would not be enough, and she was still worried about that woman. She thought that since the last meeting, Asha had been attracting her attention, perhaps because she did not understand her thoughts. The maid became worried, watching her mistress, but Cecilia said that everything was fine, and she just needed to rest a little. The maid went to prepare the bedroom, and Cecilia thought that she should not think about unnecessary things, because she and Asha were just competitors. A couple of days later, Carlyle informed his supporters that they should go to Gyro to report their victory. Lionel nodded, saying that it was important to inform the emperor about this, since it fit into the point about doing things for the sake of the empire. The mentor noted that it would probably still be necessary to ensure the well-being of the Empress and Matthias. Carlyle said he didn't see the point in making things so complicated. He would just go there and come back as soon as he spat in the faces of those two. They looked at him disapprovingly, but he continued that he would find out about the mood of secular society and warn the Ella Church. Lionel asked who would lead the escort, and Carlyle replied that Lord Lafente would be with him this time. Asha suggested that he take Decker with him. Carlyle asked if they were talking about Lord Donovan. Asha confirmed this, saying that he was her subordinate and that this would earn Carlyle the positive attitude of the Purvas people. Carlyle was silent for a moment, and then noted with a slightly displeased expression that Asha apparently trusted Lord Donovan very much. Asha said that he is like family to her. She has known him since childhood, and Decker will never betray her. These words cut Carlyle, but he thought that she was right, because no one would betray the girl they loved. Lionel expressed solidarity with Asha, also considering Lord Donovan the best choice. Carlyle replied very gloomily that he understood this perfectly well and did not need any extra reminders. Asha smiled and said that in addition to Decker, it would be good to take a couple more people with them who were trustworthy and had good fighting skills. Carlyle thought that this would put a lot of pressure on the Empress psychologically. He said that he himself had thought about it. He noted that Asha really did seem experienced in this, but she looked at him with incomprehension and said that he was flattering her. Carlyle stated that there was nothing of the sort and recommended that Asha live like a fox and use her clever head in everyday life. Asha still didn't understand him. She said that she had extorted so much money and things from him, and he was asking her to become even more impudent. Carlyle didn't understand what extortion she was talking about. Carlyle thought sadly that of all the things she took from him, she took nothing for herself personally, and it was amazing how she could be so selfless. He gritted his teeth. Asha looked very much like a person who could leave him at any time. He said awkwardly that he never forgets people who once helped him. Carlyle looked at her and suggested that she be a little greedier for herself, and that confused her. She smiled softly, hiding her embarrassment, and said that she would remember his words. But at the same time, she thought that if he knew who was causing her greed, he wouldn't have said such a thing. Meanwhile, the ladies at the palace were whispering about rumors that Carlyle would be coming to the palace for a short time. Soon these rumors reached the Empress, who was not at all happy about them. She didn't like the fact that just rumors about Carlyle's arrival were causing the whole of high society to turn upside down. She bit her lip until it bled, realizing that her attempts to create a bad reputation for him hadn't been particularly successful. She was torn away from these thoughts by Matthias, who burst into the office like a hurricane. Having caught his breath, he let out rumors that the brat Carlyle would come to their palace. She said irritably that it was so, and that he needed to pull himself together, but he interrupted her, saying that they needed to detain Carlyle. He looked a little crazy and babbled about how this was a great chance for them. She looked at him in confusion, and Matthias shouted that since Carlyle himself was coming to Gyro, they needed to lock him in the capital. Matthias wanted her to do this so he wouldn't have to go to the battlefield. The Empress felt a migraine. She explained that detaining the sinless prince, who had just won the war, and giving him the right to manage wars was not the best solution. She understood that if she gave him this right, he would automatically be recognized as the crown prince. Matthias was in despair. He almost begged his mother not to be stubborn about this. He began to talk about going to the emperor. The Empress immediately gave him a stinging slap in the face for these words. He looked at her with great surprise, misunderstanding and resentment for this slap. She said coldly that she had ignored his childishness for too long. The Empress moved towards him menacingly, repeating his words and asking if he seriously believed that the emperor would somehow change his mind. She almost screamed that even if Carlyle stayed here, Matthias would be ridiculed by this brat for the rest of his life. She felt a migraine again and called her son by name. He stuttered and asked what she wanted. The Empress came up to him, put her hand on his shoulder, and calmly asked why he was so fixated on fighting, since she said she would protect him. He said that in military lessons, he heard stories about how they killed everyone to stop the battle. The Empress smiled calmly at this and said that she would make sure that Matthias would no longer attend these lessons, which made him incredibly happy. The Empress stroked his cheek, saying that since he would not be going to the battlefield, he did not need these lessons, but she would send people to him as he needed to learn the behavior befitting a crown prince. He showed her complete obedience to this, and she smiled softly at him. As he turned to leave, she watched him with a cold, thoughtful gaze. Many thoughts visited her head, and none of them were happy. When Matthias left, she asked the servant about the medicine. He told her about detoxin, which, if used for a long time, could lead to psychological problems. The Empress listened carefully to everything and asked whether this meant that he did not kill, and the servant confirmed this. She ordered the servant to give this medicine to Matthias from that day on, and the servant obediently began to carry out this order. A couple of days later, Carlyle and his people arrived in the capital. Closing his eyes, he said dreamily that here it is, the famous smell of gyro. Decker looked at him in surprise and asked what was so different about gyro's smell. to which Carlyle replied that it was the disgusting smell of betrayal and conspiracy. This raised even more questions for Decker, but Carlyle just smiled and advised him to forget about it. He said that Pervaz's people were completely simple-minded, unlike Gyro. He turned and looked at the capital, so bright and so well known to him. He thought that earlier he had planned to simply take revenge and not get attached to anything. But seeing how Marquise Pervaz was trying to revive her lands, he changed his mind about it. He smiled, thinking that he realized that there were many bad places in Pervaz that he, as an emperor, would have to work on later, so he should become an emperor as soon as possible. Soon Carlyle appeared before the emperor, who said that he was extremely glad to see his eldest son in such a long time. Carlyle said he felt the same way, and was glad he had the chance to convey news of another victory to the emperor. The emperor asked who Carlyle had defeated in Pervaz, and he said that it was a tribe of barbarians. He explained that together with Pervaz's army, they had destroyed the Igrum tribe, thereby protecting the borders of the empire. The emperor noted that this was quite a major victory. Carlyle said that he followed the emperor's words and fought for the empire after considering the emperor's deep intentions. He said that he admired his father, who had guided his dissolute son on the right path, and the empress, hearing all this, became distorted in displeasure. The emperor just laughed and said that he was glad to see that his eldest son had finally become smarter. Carlyle nodded, saying that it had only been a year, but he had been able to see the path the crown prince must take, and it was all thanks to his father's keen eye. The emperor smiled and said that he believed that Carlyle would be able to realize his mistakes. The emperor also noted that, as Carlyle himself had rightly said, only a year had passed, and he could not yet decide whether he was suitable for the position of crown prince. Carlyle said that it was natural, and that in the next 2 years he would do his best and demonstrate his skills to the emperor. The emperor praised him, and remarked that since Carlyle had returned victorious, perhaps he had some wish. Carlyle replied that he had returned after a long time and had missed the taste of sweet champagne, so he was grateful for a place for a small victory celebration, as it would increase the loyalty of his troops. The emperor hit himself on the head and said that he had not thought about it at all. He ordered a victory banquet, and Carlyle thanked him, and the empress thought angrily that this impudent fellow was deliberately preventing her and Matthias's intervention. The empress was incredibly curious about what had happened in Pervaz that this arrogant brat had changed so much. She looked at him and thought that a frog that had hopped far away was under great pressure, and she wanted to know with what intentions Carlyle had come to the capital. The appearance of Prince Carlyle and the delegation at the palace caused great excitement among His Majesty's subjects, and surprise at the changed aura not only of Carlyle, but also of his entourage. The gaze of the subjects, especially the female ones, accompanied every step of the delegation, forcing one to physically feel someone else's curiosity. Accustomed to such looks, Carlyle could not help but ask Decker if he also felt these obsessive looks. Decker responded to this question by noting that it made him uncomfortable, and suggested that the court was still unhappy with the actions of Carlyle's men. Carlyle was extremely surprised by the depth of Decker's naivety, unable to maintain his previous expression. Pulling himself together and patting Decker on the shoulder, Carlyle noted with a grin that he shouldn't agree to ladies' invitations to go somewhere, even if they offer something tasty. Decker was indignant that such a statement was more relevant for children, and he was in no way a child. Decker noticed in his peripheral vision that the ladies of the court were still looking at their backs with cloying glances, wanting to snatch their share of the attention of these men. Having realized this, Decker still could not help but agree with Carlyle that the advice was relevant and promised to follow it. Carlyle, having returned to a serious mood, noted that no matter how hard it was in the yard, Decker was obliged to control himself, at least for Asha's sake. Decker agreed, which made Carlyle smirk, as he found such a manifestation of love for Asha as a willingness to do anything rather pathetic. Giles approached the young men and reminded them that it was time for Carlyle to go when he noticed him. Suddenly, Carlyle heard a joyful greeting. It turned out to be Count Dupre, Cecilia's father. The Earl was indeed very glad to see Carlyle alive and well, which he told the prince, and also shared his worries and sleep problems due to the news that Carlyle had gone to war with the Igrum tribe, which this time was much more difficult. Carlyle replied that there was no need to worry, but thoughtfully said that there really were some strange things in this war. A moment later, Carlyle clarified that by odd, he meant the Igrum tribe's use of catapults. This news greatly surprised Count Dupre, and he declared quite loudly that the barbarians simply could not have had the resources to create catapults, and if so, then someone else could have been involved. Carlyle didn't let the Count finish his sentence, reminding him that they were in a place where even the walls had ears. Count Dupre agreed and lowered his voice, asking who exactly could benefit from the attack on Pervaz, but the answer was obvious. Meanwhile, the hall was filled with the feeling of a swarm of bees. Conversations about Carlyle's participation in the war, Matthias's aloofness from the battles, Carlyle's wedding with Asha, the price of this wedding, and the fact that Asha did not come to the capital with Carlyle did not subside. In this noise, Carlyle caught talk about how the divorce from Asha in 2 years was already a done deal. This mood of the court did not please Carlyle, at least from a purely practical point of view, because if the entire court believed the rumors about the divorce, then everyone would try to marry their daughters to Carlyle. Carlyle was already fed up with the fact that Count Dupre and Giles were first in line to marry off their daughters, even though their daughters held no attraction for him. In place of the crown princess, only one image appeared in his thoughts, the image of his wife, Asha Amir Del Pervaz. Carlyle shook his head sharply, not understanding what he was suddenly thinking about, which caused silent questions from Decker and Giles standing at his sides. Decker remained silent, but Giles asked what was troubling Carlyle, to which he replied that everything was fine. Wanting to change the subject, Carlyle noted that they would soon begin receiving invitations, and Decker promised to pick out the ones that would be useful. Carlyle asked to choose those houses that had an army, and also not to overdo it, since it was necessary to pay special attention to the temple in the series of planned affairs. Carlyle noted to himself mentally, there was clearly no time to think about Asha. Meanwhile, in Pervaz, Asha walked through the deserted night corridors of the castle. The girl stopped near the window, noting the full moon, which was especially beautiful today. Without taking her eyes off the moon, Asha wondered if they saw the same moon in Zero, but her thoughts slowly turned to Carlyle. Asha leaned against the glass and thought about Carlyle needing to